Welcome to The Open Mind, a lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders at the intersection of science and culture for meaningful and relevant programs about mental health. The Open Mind is proudly sponsored by UCLA's Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors. I'm Vicki Goodman, and it is my honor to welcome back to The Open Mind award-winning science journalist and author, Melinda Wenner Moyer. Melinda is joining us from her home in Cold Spring, New York in the Hudson Valley to talk about her new critically acclaimed book, Hello, Cruel World: Science-Based Strategies for Raising Terrific Kids in Terrifying Times. Melinda's first book, with another memorable title, How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes: Science-Based Strategies for Better Parenting from Tots to Teens, won a gold medal in the 2022 Living Now Book Awards, and we were honored to feature it in an Open Mind program that year. For Hello, Cruel World, Melinda interviewed parenting experts and researchers across many fields: psychology, education, information literacy, technology, business, and even addiction, to provide parents and grandparents practical, comprehensive, science-based tools to help children handle the complicated world they will inherit. From these interviews, Melinda developed strategies to help children develop three core attributes: coping mechanisms, connection techniques, and cultivation practices to set kids up to not just survive, but also build a better world for themselves and future generations. Melinda's work explores the intersection of science and everyday life. She's known for her deep dives into subjects that have both scientific and societal implications, addressing issues that are relevant to parents, families, and the general public. She also writes the popular science-based parenting blog, Now What, on Substack, and is a regular contributing editor for the New York Times, the Washington Post, Scientific American, and is a columnist for Slate. We're also honored to welcome back to the Open Mind Dr. RobinBerman, Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, who will join Melinda in discussion. Dr. Berman is a founding member of the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors at UCLA, and she's the author of the best-selling book, Permission to Parent: How to Raise Your Child with Love and Limits. Dr. Berman has appeared on the Today Show, Good Morning America, and is on the Parents Magazine Advisory Board. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband and 3 children. We want to thank both of our esteemed experts and authors for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be with us today. Now, just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's program will run for approximately 1 hour, with the last segment reserved for your questions. If you would like to ask either of our speakers a question, we ask that you please type it into the Q&A located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have 1,200 people, but then who's counting, registered for today's program. So you can imagine there will be a lot of questions. So we appreciate your patience. We won't be able to get to everything, but we'll do our best. Today's program is being recorded and will be available for viewing starting tomorrow on our website, friendsofsemel.org. There you will also find a calendar of upcoming programs, videos from past events that you may have missed, information about the Open Mind Film Festival for high school students, now in its 6th year, on Sunday, and it will be held on Sunday, April 26th. Our Teen Advisory Council and their 3rd annual Gen Z Wellness Summit, happening on Sunday, March 8th at UCLA, and the Friends of Semel Research Scholar Program and endowed term chairs. Especially important right now due to the cutbacks of federal research funding that has placed neuroscience research and other vital research at serious risk. And this being the end of the year, I would be remiss if I didn't encourage all of you who are Open Mind fans to please consider making a year-end donation to support our programs. And now, without further ado, please welcome Melinda Wenner Moyer and Dr. Robin Berman. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you so much. What a thrill to have you, Melinda. I cannot imagine the amount of research that went into this book. It was such a joy to read, to have really good science all in one place. And I know parents will feel so comforted by the thorough research you did. And I can't wait for this discussion. So, what inspired you to do, with two children of your own, to dive in and do that much research?
Yeah, great question. And I just want to say thank you. I'm so honored to be here again. So thank you so much, Robin. Thank you so much, Vicki. It's really wonderful to be here. Why did I write this book? Well, honestly, it was inspired by my own anxiety as a parent right now. There's so much going on in the world, and we know our kids are going to have to deal with so many things. I mean, climate change is a big one. There's disinformation and political unrest and economic inequality and gun violence. And like you can just, name keep naming things for hours, and just it's a period of rapid change. And I think I certainly, as a parent, and I know a lot of other parents that I've talked to, are really nervous about how to raise kids in this really complex world, like how to raise them to have the skills that they will need in order to survive and thrive, and maybe even improve the world a little bit. That's another thing that I think about a lot, is, well, what can we do to raise kids who will make the world a better place? So that was really the inspiration for the book. And I ended up zeroing in on 10 skills after interviewing a lot of people, 10 skills that I really wanted to um, dig into and talk about, how do they develop? Why are they so important? And what can parents and grandparents and educators do to help nurture these skills in kids? And it was really eye-opening, and I learned a ton. And I do feel much more grounded now, I will say.
Well, I felt grounded after reading your book because so many of the things that I thought about now have so much science behind them. And you're right, it is such a tough time. And I think it's very grounding. So tell us about some of those top 10, because you said something really profound in the book. You said we need to prepare our kids instead of protect them. And I think particularly, given the world now. So what does that look like, and what's the science behind that, and how does that roll out for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one of the big themes of the book: prepare more than you protect. And I think I first want to say that some of well, it's really hard to be a parent right now. Let me put it that way. There are so many pressures on us. And I think one of the messages that we get now, especially through social media with so many parenting influencers out there, is that overprotective parenting is good parenting, that we should be scared on behalf of our kids, that there's so many bad things in the world, and therefore we need to protect our kids as much as possible from all these bad things. And that is a perfectly understandable instinct, and it is a message that we're getting from everywhere. But unfortunately, when you look at the research, it turns out that protection can backfire. Overprotection certainly backfires. And if you think about our role as parents, it's really to help our kids, learn in childhood in safe spaces the various skills that they will need throughout their lives, because our lives are not going to be easy. There's going to be challenges, there's going to be difficulties, and that's just inevitable. And so we want to give them the skills to be able to handle that. So what I have found talking with therapists and psychologists is that there is especially a lot of overprotection around emotions right now. And I think a lot of it comes from the really scary statistics on mental health in kids and teens. So we know that the CDC has come out with all sorts of data showing that anxiety, depression, suicidality, they've all been on the rise. I'm sure the pandemic, had a lot to do with that. But these are really worrying statistics. And I, as a parent, when I heard those statistics, I thought, well, okay, I don't want my kids to ever feel sad. I don't want them to feel worried. I don't want
I
them to
put
feel,
that.
yeah, none of that. Like, I don't want them to feel embarrassed, frustrated, like all these things that to me associate with poor mental health, right? Like sadness in my brain is the same thing as depression, which of course it's not. But there's this idea that, okay, if we can protect our kids from these really scary and bad feelings, maybe we can protect their mental health. And what the research actually suggests is honestly a little bit of the opposite. One of my favorite psychologists is Lisa D'Amour, and she has written a bunch of wonderful books. Her latest is The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, which I highly recommend. And in this book, she talks about how mental health is not about feeling good all the time. It's about having feelings that are appropriate for a situation and then having also the coping skills to be able to manage that feeling. And the way that kids get those coping skills that give them, the ability to handle the feelings that they have and to stay mentally healthy is through practice. It's through having opportunities throughout their childhood and adolescence to feel big feelings, bad feelings, and to live through it and to realize, oh, I could, I got through that difficult period. And also I had a chance to practice, what actually makes me feel better, whether it's like taking deep breaths. And I do this all the time with my kids, by the way, like when I'm having a tough moment or I'm nervous about something, like public speaking being one, I'll say to my kids, like, what should I do to make this easier? Like, what are the coping skills I can use? And I help them, I let them kind of brainstorm for me, like what I might want to do. We have all these conversations. Um, so the overarching point here is that actually like letting kids experience tough things, letting them experience discomfort, letting them be sad, this is all like really important practice for them in figuring out how to get through these feelings and learning and developing the coping skills they will need over time to be able to handle all the challenges that their lives are going to throw at them, forever. So that is a big part of the book. And I can tell stories like
Yep, please.
okay, I'm going to tell you one story. Because this was a very challenging moment for me as a parent. And it also gets into academic protection, which I think is something we all do sometimes. Like there's so much fear about kids getting into college now. It's really hard to get into a good college, I know. And so I think sometimes we're also afraid of letting our kids fail. And we want to jump in and save them when they're struggling at school. And so this was a few years ago, and my son was working on this huge project as part of a big social studies year-long project, actually, that was all about they had to create their own country and come up with like currency and culture and geography and architecture for this country that they built. It was so cool. And he had this project where he had to sort of build on the computer build a skyscraper that was going to exist in the city in his country. And he waited a little too long to start it, for one thing. He was in sixth grade. And then he also took on a really hard, he wanted it to be 100 stories high, and he had to build it like on Minecraft one by one. And the night it was due, he came into me crying and he was like, Mom, I'm not going to finish. I'm not going to make this deadline. And I'm so upset because I have worked so hard on it. And he had, and I don't know what to do. Will you talk to my teacher? And he's crying, and I'm like, I know you've spent so much time working on this. And in that moment, what I wanted to do was just like make it all better. I wanted to be like, it's okay, honey. I'm going to email your teacher. I'm going to explain that you've worked so hard. I'm going to get an extension. I wanted to fix it. And he, let him go to bed and have a good night's sleep. But I sat there and I thought, okay, well, wait a minute. Like, what's the thing that I could do now to actually help him learn from this situation? So first I did, I told him, like, I have a lot of empathy for you. This is really hard, and I'm sorry that you're going through this. This is tough. And then I said, but let's brainstorm what your options are, and you're going to do them. Like, you're going to figure this out, but I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here to bounce ideas off of. And, he said, okay, well, I guess, I could email my teacher, or I could stay up all night. He came up with all these ideas, and we talked about them. And I said, well, what do you think is the best thing for you to do? What do you want to do? And he said, all right, I think I'm going to email my teacher now. I'm going to explain what happened. And he said, I don't want to turn it in not being done. I think I want to ask for an extension, even if I get points off. And I think that's what I'm going to do. And, it was hard. It was hard, but he got there in the end with some scaffolding from me, and he did the whole thing. He took charge of reaching out to the teacher and explaining what had happened, took responsibility. And then afterwards, I think he felt really good. He was like, that really sucked. Like, and I wish it hadn't happened, but also like I got through it, and I kind of got through it without somebody fixing it. And so those are like, that's an example of, you can be supportive, of course, and you can validate the feelings, but you don't have to always fix them. And sometimes it's better if you don't, because that's how kids learn how to handle complex situations.
Well, this psychiatrist gives you an A+ on parenting. I mean, that is masterful because you validated the feeling, and then feelings can't be fixed. They could just be validated. And how you empowered him is so unusual in this day and age. And you said something so profound. I've always wondered what is this explosion of anxiety in the last decade? The cell phones, there's just this tsunami of anxiety. And I think that is what links to this happiness. I've got to fix it. I've got to make it better. I love how you connected those two because I do think you're exactly right. The formula for making sturdy kids is actually exposure. Right. So if you took an anxious kid to a therapist, they would say you have to be exposed to the thing that scares you. And they wouldn't reassure a child. They would make them go pet the dog they're scared to pet. And we're doing the opposite. So research is showing, and then you had a statistic in your book that just blew my mind about a study where parents were overprotective when the kids were younger and they reported more depression and anxiety in college. Not surprising, but it's amazing we have that kind of data already on helicopter parents. So incredible that you managed to like walk the walk and do that. That's quite incredible. How else are you seeing this kind of overprotective and fear in the ethos? What other ways is it coming up? And I think you're right on the academic piece. I think people don't realize that curiosity is what goes the distance, and a connection to learning and an excitement about learning versus what'd you get on the test? What'd you get on the test? And create such panic and, there's a right way and a wrong way to learn. So you built the best skyscraper for your son. You built talk about emotional scaffolding. He is good to go. No failure to launch there. So in what ways do you think there's more surrounding, how would you describe, because you went into so many in the book of what this kind of hovering over protecting, you mentioned academics. What are some other ways you see?
Yeah. There are a few other ones. I mean, one big one that I had not associated with helicopter parenting, but after talking with experts, they pointed out this is a big one. It broadly has to do with parents wanting to curate their children's environments so that their kids don't experience discomfort. And one big example of this that I see and that I have played a part in myself is sending kids to overnight summer camp, which is great. Wonderful experience. I mean, my kids have loved it. But when I sent my kids to camp, I wanted to make them as comfortable as possible in this camp. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get them, all of their stuffies. We're going to pack so that they have all of their stuffies in their bed and they have fairy lights around their bed and, whatever they want. And and I saw other parents doing this too, just over the top, trying to make their kids' camp bunk bed look and feel just like their home bed. And then they were sending care packages, and I was too, every couple days. And I realized after talking with a psychologist, okay, this is a form of helicopter parenting. Yes, you sent your kid to overnight camp. That's great. But look at what you're doing. You're trying to prevent your kid from feeling discomfort in this new environment, when actually that's kind of what's so great about camp is that it is different and it is a little bare bones and it is a little scary and uncomfortable at first. But then that's the whole point. Kids then figure out that, oh, I can get through this. And yes, this is different and it's a little scary and I'm away from my parents, but gosh, I'm making all these new friends and doing all these fun things and I'm growing and I'm learning. And that's really part of the experience. And so sometimes I think we are so worried about our kids experiencing any form of discomfort or anything different that would make them uncomfortable that we try to prevent that. We try to fix it for them so that they don't have to experience that. And it comes up in a lot of different ways. But that's another thing where I'm always kind of thinking, and also I think we do it for our own, as you talked about, our own anxiety. It makes us uncomfortable to think about our kids being uncomfortable, and we want to alleviate our own discomfort. So then we do these things like, oh, if I send a care package, I will feel less guilty or whatever it is about my kid being at camp. So, there's a lot of reasons we do this, but they're not always what's best for our kids in the long run.
I think that camp example is so spot on because I have a lot of patients who come into my office saying, my kids' picture at camp, they weren't smiling. I'm like, well, the hovering that you have access to as parents is really in the way. I mean, you send a kid to camp before and there was no sending pictures or fairy lights around the bed. And I have 3 children who I've dropped off at college, and the dorm room makeovers that are happening. It's another example of, the mattress topper, and then you have to throw that. It's the exact extension from the camp thing of, God forbid you should have any distress. And then I think it's what happens to the coping skills. So that piece of what you did, your story with the science, is just like growing a coping toolbox. And I do think you said it so well that parents are, it's so well intentioned, but they're in the way. They're deeply in the way. So allowing your kids to be uncomfortable. Tell me some other ones. Not trying to fix feelings. When in doubt, stay out. Stop the hovering.
Yep. I mean, if kids make mistakes, they leave things at home when they should have them at school, like don't always rush it in. I mean, I think what's really powerful for kids sometimes is they think it's going to be the end of the world if they forget their Chromebook or, they forget whatever it is they need at school and they call you from school, in a panic, please bring it. But actually, if you don't bring it, they get through that day and they realize, oh, I survived. Maybe they had to stay in at recess or whatever, but oh, I got through that. It wasn't the end of the world. They realize, oh, it's not that scary. And then also they're more likely to remember it next time, if they had to live through the consequence of not remembering it. So that's another big one. There was also a Mott Hospital Children's Survey that came out last year that kind of blew my mind, that interviewed parents of different aged kids and said, do you try to let your kids do things on their own? And all the parents said, yes, of course, I try to let my kids do things on their own. But then they asked very specific questions. They drilled down and they said, do you let your child go to the next aisle in the grocery store to grab something and then come back? And 50% of parents of 9 to 11-year-olds said, no, I would not let my kid go into the next aisle in the grocery store. And, and they wouldn't let their kids. And obviously, the environment matters, the neighborhood matters. And there are some grocery stores where maybe it really wouldn't be safe to do that. But they also had established in this survey that most of these parents lived in safe neighborhoods. But they also weren't letting their kids, walk to friends' houses or go to the park, spend any time in a park alone. And again, it does depend on where you live and what's truly safe and not safe. But I think there are a lot of parents that are making the decisions not to let their kids do independent things physically, go out by themselves. Even ordering at a restaurant, parents weren't letting their kids order food for themselves at a restaurant. So, you have to make these decisions in a way that feels safe. But if you think about what can I let my child do that will make them a little uncomfortable and force them a little bit outside of their comfort zone, but give them opportunities, right, to really build social skills and build problem solving skills, and just think about like, what more can I be doing there? Because I think, again, the tendency is to overprotect. And I think a lot of it is also because of parenting norms. We live in a community where no one lets their kid walk to school. Then you feel like, well, I can't let my kid walk to school. I'll be judged, or maybe they'll call the cops. So I think there are good reasons why we're overprotective. There's so many norms and pressures on us, but ultimately it's not great for our kids. And because I know this will be a follow-up question, how do you push against the norms if you're the only, if you feel like you shouldn't, right? And I did ask some experts this, and they said, it's about finding like one other family that you can build a posse with, one other family that feels the way you do. And you let your kid play independently in the park with that with that other kid, or you hang out together and you let your kids have more independence together. But sometimes it's just about like finding your posse and creating your own new norms.
Yeah, I think the same applies for the playing with electronics at someone's house. At our house we're just going to play. At our house we're not going to play video games. We're going to play. And you find those like-minded parents. I do think that makes it so much easier. And in terms of this whole other myth that's out there is this happiness thing. So I think that's in the ethos too. This myth that your job is to A, fix feelings, and then B, to make them happy, which is completely a bust and impossible. And I always think that, happiness is about learning to tolerate sad. and you're giving your kids opportunities to feel their feelings. And I think the meta message of this generation is feelings are scary. Look how fast mom's tap dancing to make my feelings go away.
Yeah.
She's doing so. I think just getting this data that you've curated that shows it doesn't roll out well. Any other things come to mind of seeing how? Because I'm really struck by how when parents let you had in the book, drink alcohol without having clear rules around alcohol, kids ended up when parents had very clear rules about alcohol, kids drank less. When parents didn't let their kids watch, R-rated movies, only PG-13 movies, kids ended up drinking less in high school. Like it's just the data of how you rolled this out was quite extraordinary. I think that was so great to not just, this is a parenting idea. This is actually science and this is how it rolls out. So I think that's super helpful for parents. Another thing you talked about was this level of polarized, rigid, non-nuanced thinking. And tell me about that and the research and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I knew from the get-go when I started reporting the book that I wanted to address, what can we do as parents to raise kids who will not end up being polarized and having only extreme views, who will be open-minded, who will be thoughtful, and who will be curious. This felt really, really important to me in this world where it feels like the pressure is on everyone to have really strong, very quick opinions about everything. I mean, just looking at social media and you see what goes viral, it's very strong, extreme opinions and takes, often like immediately after something happens. And there's no room for nuance. There's no room for like reflecting and thinking, well, let me learn a little bit more about this before I share a strong opinion. And so I really wondered, what can we do about this? And there's not as much research on polarization and how it develops as I would like. I will say that. But I did talk with some researchers, and it's really interesting because their strategies were so kind of broad and a little surprising to me. And one of the big things that they said to me was, it's really important for us as parents to listen to our kids and respect what they have to say. And this is like, you wouldn't think, why would this make my kid more open-minded, right? Why would listening to them and really listening to them make a difference? And there's really interesting research on this, actually. I mean, first of all, like listening to your kids, really respecting what they have to say, it builds trust. I mean, it's going to strengthen your relationship with them. It's also modeling a curious mindset yourself. I mean, if you're listening to someone else, it means that you're willing to be, open-minded enough to hear what they have to say. So that's that you're modeling kind of what you want to see in your kids, right? You want them to be good listeners. You want them to be curious. But there's also this really interesting research that was conducted in Israel, where researchers found that when people really feel heard, they feel like they're being listened to, they become more intellectually humble and more open-minded. And the reason for this, and maybe it will help if I kind of give a counterexample first. If you're well, the reason for this is that being heard makes you feel safe, psychologically safe. And when you feel safe, your mind opens up and you're more willing to be open-minded and consider other perspectives. And the flip side of this, which helped me understand it, was if you're not safe, if you're worried someone's breaking into your house, you develop this tunnel vision, right? You're like, I have one job and it is to get my family to safety, and everything else, like you just ignore everything else and you're like, I've got to be safe. I've got to get everyone safe. And so when you're feeling unsafe, you become very myopic and you don't open, your mind closes, right? And so the opposite of that is you do feel safe, psychologically safe, then you start to open your mind up and consider other perspectives. So that was a really, really fascinating take home, just like listening, not always jumping into lecture and educate, but listening to what our kids have to say is a really powerful way to make them more open-minded. And another thing that is interesting is just modeling a comfort with uncertainty. So what that means is if you don't have an answer, your kid asks you a question about something, it could be current events, could be anything, to feel comfortable saying, I don't know. I don't know, actually. And that's a really good question. Let's go look this up together. Let's find out more. And to just feel comfortable not always having that immediate, quick answer or opinion in front of our kids is really powerful because it shows them that it is okay, even as a grown up, to not have all the answers, to not have a strong opinion about everything immediately, and to do more research and to say, hey, and to just admit that you don't. That you're not omniscient, right? Like that is really, really powerful for kids to see. And also, it gives you an opportunity to teach media literacy because you can say, hey, let's go to my computer, let's go on Google, let me show you how I'm going to search for this, and let me show you how I'm going to figure out what sources I trust, to answer this question. And you can really teach them through researching together, how to get information, how to get sound information, and what to trust, what not to trust. So there's multiple reasons why it can be really good to, model this sort of comfort with like a lack of knowledge or uncertainty. And yeah, it's very powerful for kids to see that it is absolutely okay to not have certainty and not have answers all the time, and that really can help them not develop super strong, immediate, extreme views. So yeah, that was really interesting research.
Anxiety as well. So kids who have anxiety try to control everything because they have a difficult time sitting with uncertainty. And so it's like you're saying, let them practice while they're under your roof, and you can coach them through sitting with uncertainty versus providing false, I think Buddhists call it idiot compassion. Oh, fake answers like, oh, it'll all be fine. Don't worry, that's not going to happen. There's not going to be another pandemic. It's just kind of idiot compassion. It's fake certainty. And kids who are anxious look for reassurance. So I love that, to throw that into the parenting toolbox of sitting with uncertainty. And I thought what you said about listening was so beautiful, because it's the highest form of romance is to be seen and heard and known. And I think if you look at brain imaging study, the brain goes, gets out of the warning amygdala, danger, danger, and into the frontal cortex where you can have a measured conversation. So if your goal is to be helping this book is helping raise better humans, I think you're really on the right path. Because I think spending time talking about this polarization that's happened in our society, in politics, and people in these echo chambers of extremes, it is so dangerous, and we're seeing the fallout of it. So I so commend you for adding this in, and I think it's super powerful. And I think as parents, it's uncomfortable to sit with the unknown. It's one of those, again, it's hard for us to struggle and to not have an answer. So have you been practicing that since you've written the book, the sitting with uncertainty, the nuance, the dialectical behavioral therapy says it can be both and two things at once. And I think,
Right.
The internet sure is, this president's all good, this one's all bad. There's that they're really growing up in a time of extremes. And I think the magic middle is something to coach and teach. Anything on that in terms of, or just the really profound listening and sitting with uncertainty as the kind of roadmap to the lack of polarization and the rigidity? One more thought I have on that is the when you're saying academics, that they're so, you used a great, that people are kind of intense about academics and there's pressure to succeed. I think that's a form of rigidity, right? There's
Yes.
You have to get a perfect grade. Well, did any of us get perfect everything? The rigidity of that. You have to have a tutor. If you can't just explore, like you said, and go to the computer. I don't know, beats me. Let's think about it. Your guess is as good as mine. That kind of rigidity, I think that also contributes to this polarization, this perfect lack of mistakes. You talked about that. Talk about that, about mistake making. And
Yes, that's a big one. In fact, yeah, I was just talking with researchers who study perfectionism. In my newsletter, I was just writing about it today. And, one of the things I learned many things about perfectionism, but, perfectionism is definitely rooted in an anxiety and a feeling of not being enough. And it it's sort of an overcompensation for that feeling. Like if I'm perfect, then people have to like me and accept me, and so I have to keep being perfect, and et cetera. But what was so interesting is interviewing these researchers. I asked, okay, well, so what can parents do to reduce the risk of perfectionism and this kind of anxiety? And they said it's so important for parents to talk about the mistakes they make in front of their kids. So important, they said, and talk about, how when you were in school you failed a class, or you failed a bunch of math tests. Like, we think we shouldn't share these stories. We think we shouldn't talk about the poor decisions that we made sometimes as kids or even as adults, because we think that's going to somehow send our kids down the wrong track. But actually, it's so helpful for kids, especially anxious kids today, to see that nobody's perfect. Even as an adult, you're not perfect. You're making mistakes, and that it's okay, and that you can still be a successful human being, whatever that means as an adult, but have made a lot of mistakes and have failed a lot of classes. You can, it's again, this like both and, like, yes, you can mess up and you can also be like a good and successful human being. So that was really interesting to me that these researchers accentuated that, because it is a big theme in my book as well, the value of making mistakes in front of your kids and talking about the mistakes that you've made. I talk about how it's so normal to scream at your kids. We don't want to, but it is inevitable. We're going to lose our temper from time to time because we are humans with feelings, right? Too. And how sometimes those are opportunities. I mean, yes, we feel bad afterwards and we wish we hadn't done it, but also then you can go to your child and you can take responsibility and you can apologize. You can, really apologize to your child. That modeling is so powerful, to show a child what it's like to, take accountability and to apologize. That's so powerful. You can talk to your kids about, well, what could I do next time to not lose my temper? Again, have a conversation about coping skills. Let them teach you a thing or two about coping skills. Kids love to sort of, be the ones to give advice. And it's so helpful for kids to see that, like, we all make mistakes all the time, and that is normal. And that's just part of being human. So yeah, that's a powerful thing.
I have a story on that. So when my son was in high school and I was driving them somewhere and I said, oh, to one of his friends, I heard you just got a girlfriend. And my son gives me the evil eye, like, don't say that, mom. And so I said, my new mantra is like, when in doubt, stay out. I'm going to get like a CBT rubber band where I'm going to tap it when I open it. And I was about to open my mouth. It's something else that happened in my kitchen. And my son was like tapping on his wrist, like, okay, mom, when in doubt, stay out. So there's more intimacy after you own a mistake. Like, I'm so sorry. I didn't note to self. I'm not going to discuss other people's boyfriends and girlfriends with, I'm going to assume that's all confidential. But there's greater intimacy on the other side of repair. And I think that's why mistake making is so, hey, can I have a mommy do over? What I meant to say was, like you say, it's accountability, it's I'm human, it's you have wiggle room. These kids have so little wiggle room with all of the private coaching and the stress to be perfect. And I think that modeling mistakes is like a breath of fresh air. The woman who invented Spanx, I heard her speak once, and she said that like there was like a flub club when she grew up. Like, what are your biggest mess ups around the dining room table? Like, whoa, that's nothing. You should have heard my flub. You should have heard my mess up. So it's like you wanted to be like the winner of the flub club. And she said it taught her how to fail, how to try, how to take a risk. So I just love that you threw that research in there, because I just think that's you provided so many antidotes to the culture that we're parenting in. And I think it's such a gift and hard science. And I think you said it in such an accessible way. And I think it gives parents hope. And I think, when you say raising good humans, and I think it's so powerful. So in terms of self-compassion for parents, because I know you guys are parenting a much tougher generation than most, how does that come in? You say, I'm human. You talked about compassion in your book. Tell me how that plays. How does that factor in?
Yeah, a self-compassion is the first chapter of my book, which kind of was unexpected. I didn't really think it was that important at first. I was like, well, self-compassion sounds like a nice thing to have, but how important is it really? And then I started looking at the research and I was like, wow. self-compassion is very powerful for it's tied to so many positive outcomes in adolescents and in adults. And so it's really important for us to have it as parents if we want to teach it to our kids, because kids learn from our modeling, right? If we're constantly berating ourselves, it's really hard for kids to become self-compassionate too. So yeah, briefly, self-compassion has three parts. The first is really just like noticing the feelings you're having and pointing them out either to your child if they're having them, or to yourself, like, okay, I'm feeling really frustrated right now because I burned the chicken or whatever it is. And just noticing it can kind of pull you out of the feeling a little bit and pull you out of the rumination and give you a little space. Like, it's kind of a form of mindfulness. The second part of self-compassion is recognizing your shared humanity, which is, we were just talking about how everybody makes mistakes. It's like recognizing that everybody has had a tough time like this before, that anybody in this situation would also feel the way you feel. It's like recognizing you're not alone in having this kind of experience. We've all been there. And we can do that with our kids by saying, I think anybody who, well, you can share your own experiences with whatever happened. Like, oh yes, that's happened to me too. It's so hard. Or you could say, I think anybody in your situation would feel the way you do. And then the final part of self-compassion is kind of what we all think about when we think of self-compassion, which is just treating yourself like you would your best friend, like treating yourself kindly. And instead of, saying I'm the worst person in the world because I burned the chicken, it's like, oh, well, of course you burned the chicken. You were also, trying to schedule a doctor's appointment at the same time. And, you stepped on a Lego, and of course you burned the chicken. So it's like really treating yourself like you would your best friend, or saying to yourself what you would say to a best friend who was in the same situation. And with kids, that's easy to do. We can say, what would you say to Anna if she had this happen? How would you make her feel better? And, why don't you talk to yourself like that and see how that feels? So yeah, self-compassion it's not all that complicated it's hard to do in the moment. It's hard to actually do these things for yourself, but the steps are actually fairly simple and they are so, so powerful. Self-compassion is just, yeah, it's like my new favorite thing to talk about because I think it's under-recognized and undervalued and just incredibly helpful.
And you're the voice in your children's head forever on automatic replay. Long after we're not here, they're going to hear our voice. And we want to be a loving leader and not a critical boss. And that how we say something, it becomes how they talk to themselves. So I think that furthers self-compassion. And like who knew parenting was speed therapy, that you'd have to raise yourself before you raise your kid. But I do think it holds up such a mirror to where we as parents need to be more compassionate, to model that for ourselves. So have you noticed now with this compassionate research, you're saying things differently to your children, to yourself?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the simplest things when my kids are, berating themselves or, saying like, I really messed up and I'm terrible, instead of trying to fix the feeling, which is my first thing I want to do, I want to be like, no, you're not terrible. Why you shouldn't feel this way. I just say that sounds really, really hard. That sounds really hard to feel that way. And so that's one of the first things I say when my kids are really, really upset about something. And I have found now that my daughter sometimes teaches me a lot about self-compassion, because I will still sometimes say like, oh, I wish I hadn't done this. And she'll be like, Mom, you've had a really tough day though. I think it makes perfect sense you would make this mistake and, treat yourself kindly. And so she's now saying it back to me, which sometimes makes me feel a little like, I don't want her parenting me, but also I'm like, oh, she gets it though. She's internalizing, what self-compassion is and how important it is. And I really appreciate that.
So beautiful. That's when you know she's learned the lesson. Right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, she's really mastered it.
That's awesome. Well, I see Vicky. Well, means our time is up.
It's time for questions from our wonderful audience. But before we get to them, I just want to thank you, Melinda and Robin. This was such an informative conversation. You imparted so much practical and comprehensive wisdom to help prepare kids to live well in this complicated world they're inheriting. So I just summarize a few: listening to our kids, living with uncertainty, talking about the mistakes we've made so that showing them nobody's perfect, modeling self-compassion and kindness. So much great advice to include in a toolbox to raise better humans in a challenging time. So thank you both. And now we'll get to our questions. First question is, they ask, what is the best way to train resilience in kids?
Gosh, I mean, this is really all about what we were talking about preparing versus protecting. And I think if we can step back from doing things for our kids, fixing things for our kids, trying to, eliminate their feelings, make things easier for him. If we stop doing that, then we are going to be building resilience in them because the more that kids have to experience tough feelings, tough situations, situations in which they're not quite sure what to do and they have to problem solve or use, skills that are really just starting to develop, the more opportunities we give them to do that, the more resilient they will become. Because resilience really, I mean, if I take what Lisa D'Amour talks about in her book, I mean, she really talks about mental health and resilience as being about having coping skills to deal with all of the difficulties of life. And the way you really develop those coping skills is through practice. So I think the more opportunities that we can give our kids to, experience discomfort, experience challenges, experience failure, while also, validating their feelings, supporting them, that's how we teach resilience.
Thank you, Robin. Did you want to add anything to that?
I completely agree. And I think this culture that runs in and rescues and fixes is the anti-anxiety, it's an anxiety playbook and an anti-resilience playbook. Because resilience is, so you have a kid who's scared to go to a school overnight and the mom calls and cancels the overnight. That says you treat a kid like they're fragile, they stay fragile. The resilience playbook is exactly what Melinda said, which is let's cope ahead. What are you worried about? Oh, you're scared about being in the dark. We have a flashlight. And you do a coping plan and you work through the feelings together as opposed to trying to take the feelings away. And I think it's really powerful to let kids sit in that discomfort and do some coping and training. And I couldn't agree with that more, Melinda.
Thank you both. What about we have a question here about maternal anxiety. How does that get passed down? Does it get passed down and projected onto kids?
Yeah, that's a great question. As an anxious mom, I have certainly researched this. And yeah, I mean, there are certainly different ways in which anxiety can be passed down. There's a portion of it that's genetic, but a lot of it, again, I mean, we keep coming back to preparing versus protecting, but when we jump in and do things for our kids and protect them and don't let them try things on their own, that is communicating to our kids our anxiety. And that's sort of telling them that, oh gosh, the world is a scary place. Mom doesn't think I can handle things. And that over time can sort of increase the chance that a child will develop anxiety as well. They really kind of pick up on our nervousness, our fear, and they internalize it as like, okay, this is maybe the way I should be too. That sounds scary. And it's like, I don't want to imply that if you have anxiety as a mom that, your kid is doomed, because that is not the case. There are definitely kids who do not develop anxiety when their parents have anxiety. But I will pass along one really interesting tip that I heard. I've talked to a researcher who really studies how maternal anxiety gets passed down to kids. And she said, that if you have like a specific fear, especially a phobia as a parent, one of the best things you can do is to ensure that the first time that that child is in a situation in which you would feel really, really terrified, that they are not with you. So I am terrified of heights. And so I don't like hiking where there are cliffs. And but my kids love hiking. And when they were little, I used to say to my husband, like, can you take them on this hike? Because I'm going to be a mess. And I didn't know this research at that point, but I was just like, I don't want to go. Will you take them? And you're much less scared of heights and you'll be much better with them. But then I later learned like that was actually great, because if kids aren't exposed to a parent's excessive fear about something the first couple times they come in contact with that thing, then it really reduces the risk that they will develop anxiety, especially around that particular, exposure, whatever it is, that particular stimulus, I guess I should say. So, if you're terrified of spiders, like try to get your a partner or a friend to help, when there's a spider around and not to, that will help not pass it along to your kids. I thought that was just really interesting.
Robin?
I totally agree. So a lot of my patients say, is this my fault? I'm like, well, it's nature, nurture. Sorry, you're on the hook for both. Sorry, you're kind of in a bind here. But the truth is exactly like that. Modeling, watching your own anxiety. It's like that. Even if I'm such a believer in radical authenticity, but when it comes to anxiety, you have to shield your kids just like you did, Melinda, with the hike. So if your kids are wanting to jump off a cliff and it looks really scary to you and you want to say, don't do that, you just like, you got it. Good thumbs up, and then you turn around and you're gonna, vomit because you're so nervous. There is a piece, nobody tells you that in parenting. There is a piece where you have to be the lesson to teach the lesson. You have to, they're borrowing your nervous system, right? So what nervous system do you want them to inherit? And if you have a nervous system that, oh my God, that this is an opportunity now because you love your kids so much to just be a little mindful about your own reactions. And if you model calm, even if you're faking it, your body and mind will grow you'll train your mind to be calm, right? What fires together wires together in your brain. So you're wiring up calm. If you keep practicing being calm and breathing before you scream, don't get out of the street, or so many be carefuls. I'm like, that's not instructive. Be careful, be careful. I'm like, I never hear a parent say, be dareful. Go ahead, be careful. Go ahead, knock yourself. It's so the opposite. And be careful is not instructive. Oh, there's a branch, you're climbing that tree. Oh, hey, maybe you ought, versus just be careful is just a projection of our anxiety onto our child. And so I think so much, the more self-aware as parents, the better we care. And so this whole concept of looking at yourself, like, so you gave the perfect example, actually, Melinda, of saying, I don't want to go and, expose my anxiety. I'm going to let them enjoy their hiking and love of hiking without me projecting my stuff onto them. That's just a beautiful thing.
Thank you both. Great advice there. We have a question here. I believe it's from a teacher because she's saying, what can teachers do to help in all this? What are the most important things to keep in mind?
That's a great question. I mean, I do think a lot of what we have talked about already really applies to teachers as well. I've talked to some teachers who've said that kids have come into their classrooms really anxious and unwilling to try, scary things. Like there was one teacher who said, this kid would not go outside in the rain, and he was so scared of the rain, and he didn't want to play, and at their school they played outside in the rain. They would go out for recess no matter what. And she found after just a few months of being in a situation where the norm was like, we do this, we go out in the rain and we play and it's okay, that this child just made all of these gains and was just like a totally different child. So I think it's a really wonderful opportunity. Teachers have so much power to really create like new norms and exposures and help kids, who might be in families where there's a lot of overprotectiveness, for instance, to, get over that and in a school environment, and to recognize that they're actually brave and that they can do a lot more than they thought they could. So I think that's really powerful. I think it also, like, really respecting kids, listening to kids, letting them have a voice in the classroom is very, very powerful. That's another way that, you can help kids feel valued and feel listened to and feel worthy. I mean, there's so many things. I'd love to hear what Robin has to say about this too, because I think teachers have so much, like there's so many ways in which they help kids, and I'm so grateful for the teachers in my kids' lives.
I think you said it beautifully, actually. And I do think teachers can be an emotionally corrective experience. And you said that, Melinda, in a way. If you have a super overprotective parent at home, a teacher can hold those feelings in a different way. I think you said it beautifully, actually.
We have another question here from a parent of a toddler who is in her third trimester with her second. She's asking, how can you implement this sort of intentional parenting when your own personal resources are low? She goes on to say, I find often do not have the energy or mental bandwidth to implement this level of intentional parenting. I think we've all been there, tired, tired, tired parents.
Yeah, that is a tough a tough time to be a parent. Third trimester with a toddler. So first, I just want to say it will get easier. This is really hard. You're really in it. I think this is such a great question because it gets at something else that I haven't really had a chance to say, but is related to some of the things I've said. So I often get questions about like, how can I stay calm as a parent all the time? And what and I love these questions because I think they really reflect an aspect of parenting culture that needs to be unpacked, which is, and I think a lot of it comes from gentle parenting, which generally I support, but I think there are a lot of influencers out there who imply that as parents we always have to be completely intentional and completely calm around our kids, or we're going to really mess them up, or we're going to be bad parents. And I don't think this is true. And I've talked to researchers who say, no, 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 this is not, first of all, it's unrealistic. There's no way we can always be intentional and always be calm. But it's also, I don't think, and I recently wrote a newsletter about it, I don't think it's actually constructive in the long run because it is good for our kids to see that we are human and that we have only a capacity for so much, that we have feelings too, and we don't have to hide those. Or again, it's about protectiveness. We don't have to protect our kids from like the reality of our lives. So I think what I would say is, if you feel like you have been, I don't know, especially short with your kids because you're exhausted or you don't have enough time with them, that's okay. You're human and they need to know that. And you can also try to talk. I know you have a toddler and that might be, I don't know how verbal you can be, how much they understand, but you can try to have conversations with your kids about, mommy's really, really tired today and doesn't have a lot to give. And that's okay to say to a kid, and it's okay for them to see that we have limitations, that we're all human. So I think sometimes I just want to push back against this expectation that I think comes sometimes from influencers and from the gentle parenting world, that we have to be on perfect behavior and we have to be always like the best parent to our kids, because it's not possible, and I don't think it's true.
Thank you. Um, we're going to end on this very important topic from one of our listeners. Says, thank you. Your topic is so important today, especially for us working in education, working with humans across their development, K-12, higher education. She is an academic advisor with UCLA and seeing a lot more millennial parents coming in to protect their kids where the student has not learned to advocate for themselves. On the flip side, there are students who look at advocacy as not accepting no for an answer. How can we, as advisors, work with parents and their students to share everything you've learned? I think we all need to hear and learn from your research. I think everybody needs to buy the book. Would be a great place to begin, but comments.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a great question. There's so much here. Um, I mean, I think it's tough to, yeah. The second part we were talking about, advocacy equaling not accepting no for an answer. There's a lot there to unpack, right? And I feel like there's almost an opportunity there for helping the students with perspective taking and understanding, that the world is complex and that people have different priorities and values and goals sometimes, and we can't. And it's important to sort of be able to put yourself in other people's shoes sometimes and see other perspectives. So I feel like that gets into some of the empathy research that I talk about in my book. Yeah, I mean, I would say yes, buy my book. No, I don't know. I mean, I talk about a lot of these things in my newsletter too. If people don't want to read a whole book, they could subscribe to my newsletter. There might be useful things in there. I can imagine that is a tough job to have as an academic advisor with UCLA. Yeah. You've got your work cut out for you, I'm sure, and encountering a lot of different types of kids with a lot of different skills and maybe some limitations too. But
I would bring it back to your point, Melinda, which is the polarization, because she's talking about that teeter-totter of
Yeah.
parents covering and doing it for them, or these kids who are advocating like my way or the highway. And I think your concept of nuance and all that would be very helpful for her to read that part of your book. I think that would provide a lot of answers to that question. You touched on it a little bit today, but you really dove into it in your book. So
Right.
I would definitely say read the book.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Read the book.
I promised we were going to end on that question, but there's such an important question here that I apologize. We're going to go a little bit over. What's the best way to support younger kids when they experience natural disasters like the Altadena fires, the Palisades fires, especially when they're dealing with the loss of their community, schools, parks, friends who have moved away because they've lost their homes?
Hmm.
Tough, really, really tough.
It is. It is. I mean, Robin, I don't know if you want to start this one. I'm not a clinician. I can say what I've seen, in the research and talking to researchers, but I'm certainly not a clinician working with, in this kind of trauma situation. I don't know if you have anything you want to say
I
first.
think you actually said it a lot in your book about holding feelings that
Hmm.
can't be fixed and not to be dismissive of feelings. Oh, it's fine. We're all going to be great. It's like, we're going to get a new house and it's going to be better, and kind of selling happiness in the throes of sadness. But holding the loss and processing, and particularly young kids, they tell stories and there was a fire, a toddler. I was working with a mom and she kept saying the father kept saying fire, and talking about it and working through and empathizing, because feelings can't be fixed. And this generation really doesn't get that part. They think that somehow they can take feelings away, or it's like, think of all the parents. You're not hot, you're not hungry, you're not cold. How do you know, right? So I think you do have a lot of research in your book about that.
Yeah, no, that's true. I would certainly say, to hold on to their feelings and not try to gloss over them or fix them. While also, one thing when I talk to experts about like how do we talk to kids about really hard topics and scary things, they also talk about the importance of ensuring that our kids feel safe and that they understand that we're doing everything we can to make them feel safe. So if this is a situation where, a child is also scared about a natural disaster that is happening or about to happen, then, really emphasizing like there are layers of people that are working to keep you safe, and that is my job, and I will keep you safe, and really just emphasizing that as well so that they feel that sense of deep safety can be really, really helpful.
And one more piece to add, that feelings, it's like it's a wave, and that you surf the urge of feelings, and it's going to peak and go up, and it's going to feel, the word emotion has motion in it. It's going to pass. It's temporary. They don't need to be fixed. And I think just knowing that you can sit with sadness, and that doesn't mean you're going to fall into a deep depression, and you can feel your feelings, and allowing kids, if your dog dies and, parents say, oh, told my kid they went to doggy day camp. It's like, oh boy, we have to process feeling the little things. So when the big ones come, like the Pasadena and Palisades fires, they have practice. But I would say, don't be scared of your kids' feelings. I think parents are really scared of seeing their kids sad and anxious. And welcome to being a human again, back to your, we're human and we have compassion, and this is a huge shared experience, and you're going to feel this again, and we'll get through it, and you'll get through it. So I think holding feelings is something to really increase your tolerance for. It's tough as a parent, very tough.
It is. It is.
Well, Melinda and Robin, thank you again. I wish that I'd heard all this when I was parenting, way past that time, but this was such an informative conversation and gave us such great advice. And I do encourage everybody to buy both of Melinda's books, which have such superb titles. I think that Melinda and I, we originally met over social media when I saw the title of her book about raising kids that aren't assholes, and I thought, I got to meet this woman. You're amazing. Thank you. And Robin, thank you for sharing all your knowledge and expertise. We're so grateful to you both and grateful to everybody that tuned in for the privilege of your time. We hope you'll join us next time. December 16th will be our final open mind of 2025. Our guest will be Dr. Nicole Rust, who is a neuroscientist and author of Elusive Cures: Why Neuroscience Hasn't Solved Brain Disorders and How We Can Change That. I can't wait for that conversation. So thank you both. Fabulous, fabulous.
It'd be a great book, Melinda. Thank you. It's going to help so many parents and raise
Thank you.
smart humans.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Bye-bye.
night, everyone. Stay safe, stay well. Until next time. Good night.